Thank you very much for coming along to our talk today. I'm presenting along with my colleague Patricia, and we are part of the team at the Environmental Funders Network, or EFN for short. Between us, we take care of our research and our projects. I imagine not everyone will necessarily be familiar with EFN and the work that we do, so I thought I'd start with a bit of an introduction, and then we'll be diving into two pieces of research that we've been leading on. And meanwhile, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and pop any questions that you might have in the Q&A along the way. So EFN was set up to increase the amount of UK philanthropic funding entering the environment sector and also to improve its effectiveness. We work with different types of philanthropic funders in the UK, trusts, foundations, lottery, and also high net worth individuals. We organise events, facilitate collaboration, in part through interest groups on different topics. We share resources and generally try to support knowledge sharing and discussion on funding processes. We also work with fundraisers through our Green Fundraisers Forum, which is an open network for UK and international environmental fundraisers. We facilitate networking, provide one-on-one support, and we have a particular focus on well-being in the sector, encouraging conversations on eco-anxiety and fundraiser mental health. We also undertake research. Our two flagship publications are Where the Green Grants Went, which analyses UK philanthropic environmental funding every few years, and also What the Green Group Said, which looks at trends and challenges among sector leaders. And then we try to facilitate communication between environmental funders and fundraisers, so help the two groups to understand each other and to work together a bit more efficiently. And because of the position that we're in, we're quite well placed to amplify and communicate messages across the two groups and to try and facilitate progress in regard to difficulties being presented. The research we'd like to share today focuses on that last point, so helping funders and fundraisers in the environment sector to understand each other and be better able to empathise with each other's positions and unique challenges. Our talk is therefore mainly aimed at those two groups, and so it's perhaps a little different from some of the other talks in the conference. But as a lot of fundraising is about communication, a lot of communication is helps to fundraise. We hope that it will be relevant to everyone here. I'll just set the scene a little bit. So the UK's environmental philanthropy sector is relatively large compared to other European countries, but environmental causes still receive less than 9% of the nation's philanthropic funding. In the 2021 to 2022 financial year, just over 600 million was given to environmental groups, which is less than the annual turnover of some individual organisations such as the National Trust or Cancer Research UK. So there is a serious shortfall in environmental funding, and it's therefore imperative that every pound available is given and spent as effectively as possible. But unfortunately, various inefficiencies in the funding system mean that this is often not the case. The UK charities spend an estimated £900 million a year simply applying for funding, much of which is spent on managing a constant turnover of short-term prescriptive grants. Resources are further spent navigating complex and often unpredictable application and reporting processes. There's a serious shortage of funding for core costs, and many fundraisers report a general lack of flexibility and trust among funders. And these challenges not only hinder the overall impact of environmental groups and therefore funders as well, but also compromise the well-being of fundraisers. And one really interesting piece of research has calculated that on average, the cost of applying for grants under £3,600 actually exceeds the value of the grant itself. And this cutoff rises to £6,600 if you include the costs incurred by the funder. So this means that some funders may actually be costing the sector more than they are providing. Over the past few decades, numerous groups have called for improvements to the system. The trust-based philanthropy movement has sought to encourage more trusting and flexible funding. And EFN, along with IVAR and other groups, have repeatedly encouraged funders to provide more unrestricted and long-term funding. And changes have been made, and some funders are really leading the way on this. But progress is slow, and there's still a long way to go. So we decided to investigate the ongoing prevalence of these issues in the sector and explore the specific day-to-day challenges that are most impacting environmental fundraisers, as well as what some of the solutions are or could be. This led to our report published last year, increasing the effectiveness of environmental funder-fundraiser relationships. The data all came from an interactive session and follow-up survey with our Green Fundraisers Forum. And we asked everyone to provide recent challenges that they had dealt with, along with solutions they had experienced and other solutions that they could envisage. And our overarching goal here was not so much to point the finger at funders, because we know that they face their own challenges, but really to start a conversation and try and spur further progress. Our report details 20 different challenges and potential solutions falling under 4 categories. The first is funding availability, and this relates to who's applying and what it is possible to apply for. The issues under this category include restrictions related to organizational setup and size, location, topics, and approaches. And lack of long-term funding and funding to cover core costs are 2 big issues also discussed here. The second relates to the process of actually applying for a grant. So clarity around eligibility criteria, technical difficulties with application portals, very tight application windows, and rigid, complex applications, even for small grants. And then we come to what happens after a grant is awarded, so how the relationship between funder and fundraiser develops. And this covers the topics of trust and flexibility, and also delves into the practices that can make reporting particularly burdensome, which distracts grant holders from actual project implementation. And then finally, collaboration and coordination. There are 2 sections in this part: relationships between funders and those between fundraisers. And biggest take-homes are the amount of time needed by environmental groups to constantly rework information for every funder, and also the lack of sufficient funding to support collaboration between them. Fortunately, those who contributed to the data also put forward a huge number of solutions, some that they were already seeing among funders and some that they very much hope to start seeing. And these range from specific to broad. Some are more easy, some are more difficult. And a few examples are making application portals more user-friendly and avoiding short opening windows for applications, trusting grant holders to know how best to spend the funds, and accepting reports in various formats, including annual reports or those written for other funders. Bringing all of these suggested solutions together, we were able to pull out a few cross-cutting themes for funders to consider adopting. And these are described in detail in the report, but in general involve shifts in thinking, in attitude, and a focus on the bigger, longer-term picture. I mentioned this before, but we recognize that not all funders will be able to implement all of the suggested solutions. So the idea here is to provide a bank of options from which organizations can choose the ones that are the best fit for them. And one thing we're keen to understand in our work going forward is where the sweet spots are. What are the changes that would be relatively easy for funders to enact that could make a huge difference to fundraisers and the environmental groups that they're part of? So to do that, we need to understand what the barriers are for funders in implementing these changes. And this is the focus of our second piece of research, which Patricia is going to talk us through. Over to you.
Thanks, Sophia, and hi, everyone. So as Sophia said, through our research with fundraisers, we identified a need to better understand the barriers that funders themselves face in implementing the practices recommended. And this is the focus of the follow-up research that we're now undertaking. So this new research aims to explore the main challenges faced by environmental funders in their grant-making processes, examine how funders are already addressing these issues, and suggest additional solutions. So in consultation with a working group of 10 funders, we developed a survey to gather information from UK-based funding organisations on their progress and challenges in implementing the grant-making practices that we recommended in our previous report. And the survey was circulated over the summer with funders in the EFN network, as well as several other UK-based funder networks, targeting those funders that give at least some funding to environmental issues. And in total, 56 people representing 50 funding organisations responded. So most of the challenges that funders mentioned were acknowledged to be internal. So for example, due to long-established structures and processes and senior decision makers who might be difficult to persuade of the need to change. But many funders also pointed out the trade-offs that may be involved in adopting certain practices called for by fundraisers. So, for example, practices that require increased staff capacity on the part of the funder, such as open applications, faster decision-making, providing feedback to unsuccessful applicants, reduce the resources they have available to grant. And similarly, increasing grant sizes or setting aside funds for contingency purposes means that fewer grants can be given. And giving longer-term grants also means that funders sacrifice some of their own flexibility to adapt to future funding needs across the sector. Allowing greater flexibility in how resources are used and less detailed reports means that funders have less understanding of the impact a grant has had, meaning it might be harder for them to justify future funding to internal decision makers. So we think that in the spirit of building trust and understanding, it might be helpful for funders to be open about their reasons for adopting or not adopting certain practices. It is worth noting, though, that there might also be a trade-off here. So we heard from one funder trying to be very transparent in the information provided to applicants that they'd been told there was just too much information to take in. So there's obviously a balance to be struck. There are, however, many relatively simple steps that funders can take that have been found to make a significant difference to fundraisers and often have made funders' lives easier too. And funders provided many examples of these in our research, which we'll share in our upcoming report. So on the next couple of slides, you'll see a number of quotes from funders in our survey that point to certain actions they think fundraising organisations could take to help play their part in developing effective relationships with funders. And I won't read all the quotes out, but I'll just flag some recommendations that we've pulled out. So lots of funders proactively seek out potential partners, which means it's important that you make it easy for them to understand what you do and to know how to contact you. And this second one perhaps might raise an eyebrow or two, but maybe the takeaway from this is that while you might think it goes without saying that you need more funding, it's helpful to be explicit about your current funding needs and the difference that more funding would make to your organisation and make that information easy to find. And then sort of relatedly, it's worth being honest about the challenges that you face. And we know that this is not always easy. And similarly, to be open about unhelpful funder practices, also not very easy to do all the time. But don't just assume that the hurdles are always there. If it's not clear, ask if you can. Try to keep funders abreast of changes to your plans where possible. And it might help to recognise that many funders do appreciate how hard it is to fundraise, even if it might not always be obvious. Many funder staff started out as fundraisers themselves. And in terms of overall takeaways, while there are responsibilities on both sides, funders inevitably hold much more power than fundraisers, and this can limit the ability and confidence of fundraisers to drive changes themselves. And we think that funders should bear the bulk of the responsibility to drive changes that shift power and to bear any associated costs or risks themselves as far as possible, recognising that they generally have much greater capacity to do so. And of course, funding and fundraising organisations are not homogenous groups, and each individual organisation will face a distinct set of challenges. So, for example, some funders depend on fundraising themselves, which can limit their flexibility. We think that open communication in both directions is key to improving understanding of the other partner's unique circumstances, limitations, and challenges, and building trust on both sides. And the responsibility for ensuring communication channels are open and accessible, and proactively inviting communication of challenges as these arise, lies with funders as the power holders. But fundraisers in turn should take up these opportunities to communicate their needs where possible, or if not possible, try to explain why so that funders are aware. And in particular, it's clear that funders who proactively invite feedback on their grant holders' experiences gain significant value from the feedback received. So this feedback can help them to understand where their practices are helping or hindering, and what changes might be particularly helpful to fundraisers and may not be much effort or might even be beneficial for the funder. Some funders mentioned that this feedback was also extremely helpful in persuading senior decision makers in their organisation, who might not be in regular contact with grant holders themselves, of the difference some of these practices can make to fundraisers' abilities to do their jobs well. And many respondents referenced internal decision makers' lack of understanding of fundraiser challenges as one of the key barriers to making changes to their practices and the difference it can make to show evidence of the impact these changes can have, both through research from ourselves and others, and in particular through the conversations that they themselves have with fundraisers. So again, we recommend both that funders proactively invite feedback from their grant holders and that grant holders take these opportunities to provide feedback wherever they can, and even if they're not invited to do so, if they feel able. So overall, our research has highlighted that the challenges funders and fundraisers face in interacting with each other effectively do very often come down to a lack of open communication. And with more open communication leading to improved understanding of the challenges each organisation is facing, both funders and fundraisers will be much better placed to find common solutions to these challenges. And of course, it's very much in both their interests to do so, because environmental funders and fundraisers are ultimately striving towards the same goal, which is ensuring that funding flows as efficiently and effectively as possible to maximise environmental impact. And we hope that our research will help to highlight the importance of effective communication for effective funding relationships. So we also hope the research will shine a light on some of the many examples of good funder practice that are, thankfully, already out there as a source of inspiration and guidance. And as a few examples, this slide lists various funders who we highlighted in our previous report because they were often recognised by the fundraisers we spoke to for their efforts to adopt more progressive grant-making approaches and reduce the burden on fundraisers. So we're already planning how we can do more to share these examples of good practice and provide more opportunities for funders to share their experiences and learnings with others. And one such opportunity is coming up very soon at our online conference for environmental funders and fundraisers on the 8th of December. There's a sign-up link in the resources that we've shared alongside this talk, which you can find by clicking on the resources button at the bottom of the screen. And please do look out for our new report when it's published in the spring and help us to share it if you can. You can sign up to our newsletter for fundraisers via the link to the Green Fundraisers Forum on the slide to hear our latest updates on this and our other work. Or if you're a funder, you can sign up to join EFN and receive our funder newsletter via our website. And both the Green Fundraisers Forum and EFN are free to join. This slide also lists the reports we referenced today, so the one that Sophia referred to, as well as where the Green Grants went and the Scotland version of that report, as well as links to sign up to the Green Fundraisers Forum and the conference that I mentioned. And all these resources have been shared on the resources section of the platform as well via the button that you'll see below. So thank you so much for listening, and we've definitely got plenty of time for some questions if you have any. I think we've got until 2:15. You can also contact either of us afterwards via our emails on the slide, and I think we'll be sharing these slides afterwards as well. But yeah, with that, I think we'll both have a look at the questions, see if there are any questions that have come in so far, and maybe Sophia, you could let me know if there's any that have come in already.
Yeah, we've got one that has come in. How can someone deal with wanting to provide feedback to a funder but not risk getting future funding from the same funder? And this is a really good question, and this is not the first time I've heard this question. And it really speaks to like the power dynamics at play, which is something I feel quite strongly about. You know, I really feel that in general, there's a sort of hierarchy of, you know, funders have the money and fundraisers are asking for the money. And this is something we try and push against as EFN, because really without charities, groups doing this work, the funders aren't going to achieve what they want to achieve either. So, you know, I think part of this is about shifting to a more equal space where funders and fundraisers see each other more as partners rather than one giving and one requesting. Unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. And, you know, it is really, really important that funders receive honest feedback, because I think a lot of the times, you know, it's really tempting to just sort of complain to, you know, a peer about the way that a funder is and not speak to the funder themselves. And it's so important that we do. There is a really good site, and the name has gone out of my head, but I'll be able to find it. There's a site for providing anonymous feedback to funders. I don't know if you can remember what it's called, Patricia, but I'll find it and drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. I also can't remember the name, but
yeah, I'll find it.
Yeah.
It's in the report. It's mentioned in the report anyway. And so I recommend, if you don't feel confident to give feedback to a funder, you could go down that route, do it anonymously. But really, it's up to funders should be asking, and they should be creating an atmosphere and a partnership where someone feels comfortable to give honest feedback. So the onus sort of has to be on funders there as well.
Yeah, maybe I could just add to that as well.
Please.
And maybe Sophia, you can have a look at the next question that's come up while I do that. But
yeah,
I think that, you know, there are different ways of providing feedback. I'm sure we all know this. So, you know, and it's great to provide positive feedback as well. And, you know, if your feedback is sort of constructive and you're making suggestions as to things they might do differently, that might not be very difficult for them. You know, that's not always necessarily going to compromise your future chances. I realize that it isn't always easy, but I think, yeah, you can be sort of careful in how you provide that feedback so that it's not necessarily overly critical, but more sort of constructive.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's also worth, I mean, one thing in the report is around asking funders to try and support networking among grant holders. And so I think kind of pooling some of the feedback is a nice way to go as well. So you're not necessarily presenting it as an individual, but as a group of grant holders. The next, we've got a couple of questions about project development. And yes, totally, this came up a lot. In general, funders are more interested in funding something that is already a proven concept. But it can't be too proven because it still has to be, innovative and new. We put a specific recommendation in the report about the need to fund project development. But in a broader sense, really, there's a need to not specify that funding is for specific projects or specific stages for projects. We really push the need for unrestricted funding. And the idea is that you are funding the organization because you believe in them, and what they choose to do with that is up to them, and what stage of things that they want to invest in is up to them. And it absolutely, going to the second question here, it's absolutely an issue in terms of losing staff. If you have just projects funded and you build up all that capacity and all that training and all those relationships, and then the project comes to an end, you let go of the staff and you're having to start again. And that's just so, it's tough on people, it's inefficient as a team, it's inefficient for the work generally. And so we do raise that, and it's a really, really important issue. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that topic.
Yeah, I think it often comes down to communication, as we've said. Like, I don't think any funder is trying to make anybody's lives difficult by by creating these issues. They're probably, not really aware of the full implications of those, gaps that are mentioned in the question, if there's a gap between, an initial stage and a follow-up phase. So, let them know, and ideally with, as much notice as possible, that this is potentially going to be an issue in terms of staffing, etc. And hopefully they will be sort of somewhat flexible to be able to accommodate that. But yeah, ultimately it's about sort of raising awareness that these things can be, extremely disruptive for organizations.
Yeah. We've had a question about AI. This is interesting because I was actually watching the AI session of the Communicate conference a couple of hours ago. AI, yes, absolutely is changing the space. And it's interesting seeing how people are responding to it. So it's being used a lot by fundraisers to write bids, and there are tools being, Plinth, for example, has its own AI support tool specifically designed to help fundraisers write bids using AI, and there are various other tools like that as well. And I've kind of seen a mix of responses from funders. Some of them are just don't use AI. Why are people using AI? And sort of, actually say that, please don't use AI. And others are actually really embracing it, like National Lottery Community Fund, for example. They actually have an AI tool built into their site, which is designed to help applicants. And personally, I think that's quite a nice way to go, because you're leveling the playing field there as well, because some people have more access and more familiarity with AI than others. Really, I would just put a strong word of advice on how people are using AI. We've had, it's the same as job applications. We've got 2 jobs out at the moment, and it's really, really, it can be really obvious when someone used AI for the application, and it's the same for fundraising bids. And the rule that I was told a little while ago, which I like, is start with a human and end with a human. So you're drafting your own stuff, and then you might be using AI to go back and forth and have I missed something? And then you need the human. You have to check it, read it, rewrite it, etc., etc. That's just one tip I would give. Like, never submit something that you haven't proofread and changed the American language and all of the different M dashes that it uses. There are things like that to keep an eye on. But it's a really interesting question in general. And CAST are doing a lot of work in this area, and they run a group for funders and an equivalent group for charities around embracing and using AI. And also, if helpful, who's it, Charity Excellence Framework, are doing a lot of work supporting charities to use AI as well, fundraisers in particular. And they provide free templates for AI policies for fundraisers, if anyone's interested in that too.
Yeah, I think it's a really fast evolving field, and I remember sort of hearing from various funders that so far they hadn't necessarily received very obviously sort of AI generated applications or a big uptake in those. It might be something that's potentially coming, or it might be that the AI is being used very wisely, and so it's not necessarily obvious. Likewise, I'm not sure many funders are yet necessarily incorporating AI into how they assess the applications that come in. But again, I suspect that that may start to change. And yeah, luckily it is, as Sophia says, a really live conversation in the sector that we should all be contributing to as far as possible. But yeah, second, those resources, Charity Excellence Frameworks just launched a free AI course sort of tailored to the charity sector, which yeah, looks like it's going to be quite helpful.
That's a really good point about how funders are using AI as well. Because I mean, yeah, I've been in meetings with funders where they've admitted that, all the reports that they ask charities for, they don't actually get time to read. They can't assess all of the information that comes in. And so, being able to sort of use AI to summarize things and to go through things quicker. And a lot of funders that we've spoken to have complete overwhelm when it comes to applications, particularly the smaller ones. And that's what's led to an increasing number of trusts and foundations closing their doors because they're like, how do I deal with this number of applications? AI is an answer to that. You can build a model that will do an initial screening that just helps to manage that sort of overwhelm. So the cast who I mentioned do have this group for funders, which is really, really nice. It's a really good one because it's just all about knowledge sharing, and you have people who are AI, whizzes and AI total beginners all in the same group, just sort of chatting and overcoming that fear of using it. And if funders can become more efficient, then hopefully they can support fundraisers better.
There's a question around support for sort of advising organisations and projects to become more sustainable. I mean, again, there's lots of good resources out there. So Charity Excellence Framework that I already mentioned, but also the Green Fundraisers Forum that we run ourselves is a great sort of hive mind. I think, I can't remember how many members there are now, Sophia, maybe it's thousands.
1,400?
I think it might be even higher than that. But yeah, so it's a great place to ask questions like that of other fundraisers to hear about their experiences. But also, I mean, this is very much the reason that we would like to see a sort of more of a partnership relationship between fundraisers and funders, because often funders have great knowledge on this as well in terms of providers, and obviously they're pulling the strings in terms of where the funding is going, and if they're aware that there's a need for more support with sustainability assessment, for example, then they might be able to provide some funding towards this, but also some advice in terms of experts to go to help with that. So we'd really like to see just more of these conversations happening with funders in terms of organisations expressing their needs and looking to funders for advice, not just for funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also comes back to the idea of sort of unrestricted funding as well. The idea that charity should be able to say, actually, we have a bit of a gap here. We want to become more sustainable and have the funding to do that, without having to try and squeeze it into a box that fits a funder. Also, as well, I did notice just the other day that National Lottery Community Fund are funding a large pilot with Lloyds Bank Foundation, which is specifically about this. They're piloting sort of support for charities for like resilience and sustainability and a few other topics I only glanced in detail. I only glanced briefly, but that might be worth looking into to see if that's something that you could join.
I think a little while ago we did also pull together some resources on our own website, which I was just having a quick look for, which might be
we've got
slightly outdated now, but
yeah,
because we often get questions like this coming into our Green Fundraisers Forum, and so where we can, we try and help to compile resources. But yeah, if we find that in the next few minutes,
we could send it.
Yeah.
We don't currently have any more questions, but I was thinking of something that we could chat through that might be of interest, Patricia, which was just our own kind of feelings and surprises that have come up when doing this work. I don't know if you have any particular things to talk about, but I found myself constantly like surprised in doing both these pieces of work. Firstly, at the enthusiasm, actually from both sides. We've had loads of people wanting to talk and tell us their challenges, and wanting funders particularly wanting to know how to do better. There are many funders who are very aware that they want to improve their processes, but don't know where to start and don't know how to do it. And a lot of them are very, very stretched. They'll have teams of maybe 1 or 2 part-time people, some of the smaller sort of trusts and foundations, and they just don't know how to get started. But also the misunderstanding is really, really interesting. I mean, the fundraisers tend to assume that funders have it all together and have completely the sort of power to, make all these decisions, when often they're beholden to their own boards, trustees, their own funders, and the charity commission, in a lot of places. And then the other way around, we talk about well-being in the fundraising sector and just how hard it is to apply and apply and apply for so many different grants and be constantly turned down, and having the stress of, you need the organization needs to pay everybody's salaries, and that is on the fundraiser. And sometimes I talk about that with funders, and they're like, "Huh, I've not really thought about that." So there's real misunderstanding on both sides, and kind of, the empathy isn't really there because the understanding isn't there. And that was something that came up for me as this research, and has made me feel that, this is why these kind of conversations are really needed, to just try and increase the understanding, really.
Yeah, and I think conversations is the key word. It is as we keep saying, it is very much around communication, and obviously it's a shame that those communication channels aren't always as open as they could be. But yeah, I mean, I would imagine that those funders that responded to our survey are probably at the more progressive end of the spectrum in terms of those that would have bothered to respond. But certainly the vast majority of those are already doing a lot, but also very keen to figure out what more they can do. And I think that is the case for the majority of funders. They're very aware that there are challenges, that that there's a huge shortfall in funding. It needs to be used very efficiently, and there are huge inefficiencies in the system. But there's a difficulty in knowing how to make progress, and obviously that's partly why we're doing this research, to try and better understand what the barriers are, but also to help those who have found valuable solutions to share those. And that's one of the most powerful ways of driving change, is to sort of encourage sort of peers to talk to each other and share learnings, and say, oh, we're a sort of similar type of organisation to you, and this worked for us, maybe it would work for you too, or ask questions of peers. So just as we aim to do with the Green Fundraisers Forum in terms of sharing questions and learnings, we're very much all about trying to encourage funders to share their learnings in terms of the experiences that they've had on this, and lots of other issues as well. And so that's why I was saying, one of our priorities in terms of follow-up from this research is going to be to help provide those platforms for funders to learn from each other. And the conference I mentioned that's coming up in a few weeks will include a panel of funders who contributed to our research, talking about their own experiences and their own challenges. And hopefully it will spark a really good conversation with other funders, sort of asking questions, and essentially trying to share experiences and figure out the best way forward for their own particular situation.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to that day. We don't have any more questions that have come in. If there's anything else you feel we should chat through, or we can wind up early as well, give people a chance to have a bit more of a break before the next session.
Yeah, just one more shout out to the resources, which hopefully you've found, and we'll try and I think there's a way for us to share these slides afterwards as well, in case that's useful. And of course there'll be the recording too. Feel free to get in touch with us, and if you do have a sort of fundraising element to your role, even if it's not your main role, then please do take a look at our Green Fundraisers Forum. It's such an active community. It's a really active forum and a great place to ask questions, including about things that aren't strictly fundraising related. So do make use of that resource. It is free, as we said.
And just a couple of points in the chat about, I have a small CIC and would be great to speak to others who are in a similar position. The Green Fundraisers Forum is a good place to do that. We have a really active Slack workspace where people can just connect on any topic. So I would send you in that direction. Okay, we'll wrap up. Nothing's coming, but please feel free to email either of us at any point. More than happy to keep continuing this conversation and answer any further questions that you might think of at a later time.
Thanks so much for coming and for listening. Look out for the report when it's published.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.